Gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional roller coaster. If you have been in a relationship with a narcissist, well, you know the damage that they can do. On today's episode, we will share some tools that you can use to not only survive, but thrive after enduring a narcissistic relationship, as well as answer your questions. On this episode of Ask the Doc, no appointment needed.
Funding for this program is brought to you by Michael J. Zinner, MD.
Send in your questions to questions@allhealthtv.com or AllHealthGo on Facebook or YouTube, or visit the Ask the Doc page on our website, allhealthtv.com.
And welcome to Ask the Doc, the show where we encourage our viewers to send in their health questions. I'm Julie Donaldson, and I am here today with Dr. Rachna Buksani Mirpuri, licensed mental health therapist. And Dr. Buksani, this is really such an important conversation, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this topic.
Absolutely. Lovely to be here.
Okay, let's get straight to it and get started. Today's first question, it comes from Kidada, who reached out to us from our allhealthtv.com website. And he asks, hi, Dr. Buksani, what are the most common signs that you have been in a narcissistic relationship? And why do so many people miss them at first? Now, this is so true, right? Too often we realize when it's too late. So why is it that we miss the warning signs?
So here's the thing. I think we need to understand, first of all, thank you, Kidada, for starting the day off with this question, because it's so important. And often we blame the victim, right? Because we feel like it's our responsibility, that we need to go around with this microscope and we need to sift all these warning signs out. Here's the thing. The so-called warning signs that we are talking about are really the ones that society reinforces, right? Because a narcissist is so charming, they're charismatic, they're most likely successful. So society reinforces that. So the first thing I want to say is, let's not put that burden on us, right? It's not our job to go around sifting these people out, because again, that's some of the things that society expects of us when we look for partners. But there are certain traits and signs of narcissistic personality disorder that I think can be helpful for people to keep in mind. So, one of them, grandiose sense of self, right? So people who think that they are very important. But here's the thing. It's not that I am important. I am more important than everybody else, right? So it's always in comparison to somebody else. I am more superior. I'm superior than everybody else. There's a constant need for admiration. There's an inflated sense of entitlement. And Julie, if I had to pinpoint one trait that is probably the most, indicative of narcissism, it's that one, that sense of entitlement. Because if I say I want something, you need to give it to me, whether or not you like it, right? So that sense of entitlement, the willingness to exploit others, or what we call Machiavellianism, the lack of empathy, and arrogance. I do want to make a note also of the lack of empathy, because I want people to understand that, because that's, again, a place that people get confused, right? Because they're thinking, what do you mean they don't have empathy? But my boyfriend, when I lost my job, he came and put his arm around me and he said, oh my gosh, I feel so sorry for you. Yes, so there's different kinds of empathy. Narcissists have what we call cognitive empathy. So they know when I need to feel bad for someone. What they lack is the emotional empathy, which is me actually feeling for somebody else. And they lack compassionate empathy, which is actually the desire of, oh my gosh, I feel bad and I want to be able to help you. But because they have the cognitive empathy piece, people get confused, because they know when they have to feel bad. So the tears will roll down when they know that the tears should be rolling down, not because they feel bad for someone. So these are some of the traits that we can keep in mind when we are in relationships, as little warning signs.
And it's not like they come to you and say, oh, hi, I'm a narcissist, and these are the traits that are going to say that, which is why I think it's easy for a lot of people to get confused and maybe not recognize it until they're probably much further in and emotionally connected. And then that's where the damage gets done. Now, to reinforce everything that you were just kind of saying there, we do also have this video to show from the Cleveland Clinic.
Narcissistic personality disorder involves consistent patterns of perceived superiority, an excessive need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. Here are 3 traits that especially stand out. Number 1, an overinflated sense of self-importance. Number 2, a sense of entitlement. Number 3, taking advantage of others to achieve their goals. NPD is associated with a greater risk for depression, loneliness, and suicide. If you're exhibiting signs or symptoms of NPD, or if you're feeling a little lost, talk to your healthcare provider who can shed some light on your current situation.
Dr. Bixani, do you have any comments to feed off of that video as well?
No, I think the traits are what it is. I do wish people see that, and if they do have, because we rarely see people with NPD coming into therapy, but I know there's help. So I encourage someone, if you're experiencing those symptoms, to please reach out.
I think that's the biggest thing as well. And they're also seeking help by asking questions to you. And our next one comes from Polly, who sent us this question through our Facebook page. Dr. Bixani, is it really possible to rebuild trust in yourself and others after experiencing a narcissistic relationship? And if so, how? Okay, Dr. Bixani, I think this is so true. It's part of the recovery process in wanting to have a healthy relationship after being with a narcissist.
Absolutely. And first of all, my heart goes out to Polly, because I know those relationships, just how difficult they are. So, kudos to you for even reaching out and trying to get help. Yes, we can rebuild trust. And the way to do that is really by going through that journey of healing. So with a therapist, hopefully, who is trained in dealing with victims of narcissistic abuse, if you can actually get yourself there, get some help, heal, grieve, from that relationship. Forgiveness is a big part, but it's a very personal thing for everyone, because there's no expectation that you need to forgive someone who's been so abusive to you. But if you choose to, then that's helpful too. But really, it's that healing from trauma and then moving towards self, or the individuation, right? So the only way to be able to trust myself, actually trust others, is to trust myself. And the way to trust myself is to come back home to myself. And that's what therapy does. What it does is it takes you on a journey to just come back to you, what you were before this, and then relearn how to build that trust in yourself and others. So absolutely, I have done it. I have worked with victims of narcissistic abuse who have been able to regain that trust and go ahead and have very, very successful lives. So I want to give you hope that that is absolutely possible.
How much of that is also, as you're going into relationships with others, and part of trusting yourself, is that learning the discernment so you don't get into another relationship that's kind of repeating what you came from?
Yes, and I think the only way to break that cycle is by knowing yourself, right? So yes, absolutely. A big part of that journey is about, okay, what happened there? And again, not to blame the victim, because you wouldn't have been able to see the signs no matter what, because those signs, and hopefully one of those questions come up about the relationship cycle of narcissism. We'll talk about that, but it's very hard to pinpoint those signs. But really, the journey of therapy with victims of narcissistic abuse is coming back to self. It's that individuation, it's knowing yourself. And once you operate from self, then you're operating from that confidence, from trust, from compassion. And that's what helps you rebuild that trust.
Okay, our next question, it comes from Facebook, and this one is from Min. Min asks, hello, Dr. Buxani. What are the first steps one can take to emotionally detach from a narcissistic partner, especially when it is not possible to completely cut contact? A little bit of a tricky question here, right?
Yep, absolutely. Min, again, my heart goes out to you. It is not easy to be in one of those relationships. And listen, people stay in these relationships for many reasons. I have clients who've been staying in these relationships because they can't leave. They have kids or they have financial obligations, and they just can't seem to find a way out. So I get it. And I know this must be painful, Min. Here's one of the techniques that I think is my personal favorite, and it's called the yellow rock. And yellow rock is being able to be pleasant with the person. So it's actually an offshoot from the gray rock technique, but the gray rock technique was basically become so boring, become so uninteresting that the narcissist just doesn't have any interest in you. However, that's difficult to do, and especially when it's romantic relationships or familial relationships. So then an offshoot of that is the yellow rock technique. And basically what it does is it tells you to balance out your protection. Like, so I'm protecting myself, but also displaying a very limited amount of empathy for the narcissist. So it's that delicate balance. It's acknowledging the narcissist's feelings without getting drawn into it, right? So as if it would be a professional colleague that I was talking to. So you feel bad for them, but you don't really get drawn into their drama. That's one of the best ways of dealing with someone who you can't go no contact. A big part of this process is the radical acceptance, understanding that this situation is not going to change. I think what helps people detach, Min, is understanding that this is the situation and this is how it's going to be. So when you understand, because I think what keeps people stuck is the hope that maybe they'll change, maybe tomorrow will be better, maybe, and the trauma bondedness of these relationships where sometimes it's good and sometimes it's so bad. So they don't know what to believe anymore. So understanding that this is the pattern, this is the situation, it is not going to change, kind of helps you towards that process of detachment. And then techniques like yellow rock or gray rock, if you can, are great first steps.
What a fantastic answer for that. And I certainly hope it helps men as they move forward. So we get a lot of questions. I know there's a lot of people watching that want to know how can they submit their questions. So here you go.
Send in your questions to questions@allhealthtv.com or AllHealthGo on Facebook or YouTube, or visit the Ask the Doc page on our website, allhealthtv.com.
And if you've not checked out the website, make sure you do. There's a lot of good information on there for you regarding so many different topics. And again, it's where you can submit your questions to be asked by one of the doctors. Our next question, though, here it comes, and it is from Tex. Tex asks, what are common misconceptions about narcissism that people might have? Really good question there. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, right?
I love it. Oh my gosh, Tex, thank you. Thank you for bringing this up. I think this is so important to talk about because people get so confused. So the first and the biggest misconception is that everybody who's narcissistic has to be that grandiose, that very, outgoing, extroverted, loud person. But that's not true because we do have the covert and vulnerable narcissist that really looks very different than your traditional grandiose narcissist. And even in the DSM, all those traits that we've talked about is the grandiose narcissist. But let's talk about the vulnerable narcissist because there's so many of them out there and we miss them. So the vulnerable or the covert narcissist is the person who's constantly playing victim. These people, they have such a deep desire to feel special, but that does not get validated because there's nothing special about them, right? So they're constantly moping, they're constantly complaining. There's failure to launch. You'll see these people who've got everything, but they never end up doing anything with their lives. But then when you ask them, they're complaining because you know what, the world has been so unfair. They just don't realize how good I am. If I only got a chance, or if someone knew how good I was, then I wouldn't be in this situation, right? So these are the people who, again, so desperate to feel special, but the world does not validate it because there's nothing special about them. I want to take a minute to distinguish the thoughts to really, help people understand the difference between a grandiose and a vulnerable narcissist. So the grandiose says, everybody envies me. Everybody wants to be like me. I am the best. That's the grandiose narcissist. The vulnerable narcissist is the one who's actually so insecure, who's like, I'm not as good as everyone. But this person is dangerous because they kind of hold on to every little insult, every little they when they feel they're slighted, they hold on to that, and they have a perpetual feeling that the world is out there to get them, right? So I think it's very important to understand that there is not one kind of narcissist. There is this covert, vulnerable narcissist that we see a lot, and we tend to miss this more than the grandiose narcissist because it's not on your face.
What an important distinction between the two, because you're almost describing literally two polar opposite people that can have the same damage on the relationship, depending which way that it goes. Thank you for that, Dr. Buksani. Jack asks us a question from our YouTube page. Dr. Buksani, I have been having some trust issues since I broke up with my ex, a legendary narcissist. Now, as such, I'd like to know if there are any evidence-based treatments that specifically address the trauma of narcissistic abuse. And if so, what are they? Okay, Dr. B, what do we have to say to Jax on this one?
So we rely on, so up until recently, we really did not have narcissistic abuse specific programs or treatments or trainings, right? Now we do. We have one. But it's not that many people are not getting trained, but they're traditional trauma techniques that can work perfectly well in helping someone cope with narcissistic abuse. Those include EMDR, somatic therapy, and somatic therapy is so helpful because it's really that body mindfulness, and that's very important especially when you're healing from narcissistic abuse, because trauma sits in your body, right? Sometimes, when I get triggered, I may not know exactly why I'm getting triggered, but my body remembers everything. So somatic techniques are brilliant. I use it a lot with my own clients when I'm working with them. There's also trauma-based cognitive behavior therapy that's extremely helpful. And a therapy that's extremely promising, that's coming up more and more, is IFS, which is internal family systems. I tend to use it a lot. And it's very, very therapeutic. I think very compassionately therapeutic to the victims of any form of abuse, including narcissistic abuse.
It's interesting because, as you mentioned first on, we tend to think of an abuse as something maybe physical, but we don't realize there's an emotional, there's a spiritual, there's a mental abuse that people suffer as well, and they need treatment from in order to move forward healthy, right?
Absolutely. And Julie, I'm going to take a second because again, you brought up such an important point, and I think people need to understand this because, again, when we think about trauma, we tend to think of, oh, I went and fought a war, or I was molested, or I met with a tragic accident. And yes, that's trauma, and that leads to what we call PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. But there's the small t trauma, which is what narcissistic abuse causes, right? So small t traumas are those chronic, everyday, being gaslit, being invalidated, someone who's undermining you every day, and it goes on and on and on. Someone who's making you question your reality, somebody who has that coercive control on you. And what that does is it keeps you in a chronic state of stress. So that abuse is where we see complex PTSD. And so some of these techniques that I have given you are to address complex PTSD, is what we see in victims of narcissistic abuse.
So important. Our next question here comes from Facebook, and it's from Avery. Hi, Dr. Buksani. I was initially hesitant to write in and share my story, but I'm hoping that knowledge is power. I hate to say it, but my brother is a classic narcissist, and it is having a detrimental effect on the rest of the family. Now, we would like to know if there is a way to maintain our mental health while also helping him deal with his issues. And Dr. Buksani, just again, from what we were talking about just a moment ago, you have to take care of yourself when you can't have contact, but also I can see the need to want to be able to help somebody deal with this so that they can have a better life as well.
I think it's always, and I'm going to be very careful when I say this, because it doesn't usually go well when you tell a narcissist that they need to seek out therapy, right? So you have, if you really feel that it's going to be okay, then yes, suggesting that they get some help. But again, keeping in mind that that might end up being a very explosive conversation, right? But now moving on to the ones who are not the narcissists, and who have family members and who they're dealing with, working on healing, reach out to therapists. We can help you cope with people who you're dealing with who are narcissistic, and maybe you need to stay with them, or you choose to stay with them for whatever reason, because they happen to be a sibling or a parent. Working on healing, working on acceptance, working on grief, of a relationship that could have been extremely important. Offering self compassion, right? Dealing with yourself. I know a client who used to go, she came from a narcissistic abusive family. Her father, was narcissistic. And every time she went to visit him, when she came back, it took her a week. It was almost like a detox that she needed to go through to heal from everything that had happened in that week. And I absolutely encourage that. You need to know that when you are in that environment, you're going to take time. Every time you're exposed to something like that, it may take you time to kind of just heal from whatever those little chronic trauma, abusive things that have happened in your visit with them. So please take care of yourself. Self-care, extremely important. Setting those boundaries, internal boundaries, extremely important. So all of that is necessary, especially when you've got a family member who struggles with NPD.
And we know the family dynamics, they can be so challenging, but it kind of goes back to you can't help somebody if they're not acknowledging that they need help themselves. And that's the problem with a lot of narcissists, right, in the first place. But it was a very good question, and we're glad that Avery asked it in all of these questions that are coming in. So if you aren't sure how you can submit your questions, once again, here's how.
Send in your questions to questions@allhealthtv.com or AllHealthGo on Facebook or YouTube, or visit the Ask the Doc page on our website, allhealthtv.com.
So there's the website, there's YouTube, and there's Facebook, and there is also Instagram, which is where our next question comes from Bettina, who asks, "Hi, Dr. Buksani. My brother just got out of a relationship with one of the most narcissistic women on the planet. How long does healing really take, and what are some realistic milestones to expect along the way?" Look, healing, we've talked about healing's a journey, right? So what can you say to kind of help her brother?
Absolutely. Healing is a journey and not a destination. So when, I think we spend our lifetimes healing from all sorts of things. First of all, Bettina, thank you so much. You seem so concerned about your brother. So thank you for reaching out. I wish I could tell you a timeline, but there isn't one, because really, those milestones are achieved at different times by different people. However, some of the things I think, that you aspire to achieve when you are in therapy, or, where that, okay, oh, I can see that shift, is when the person begins to operate from self. And self is where we have, like I said, courage, confidence, clarity, calm, compassion, connectedness. So when I see, when you see your brother operating from that, maybe doing something, showing courage and doing something which he wouldn't do before, or my gosh, his creativity is coming back. He was always so creative, but he lost it somewhere, and that's coming back now. That would be an amazing milestone. So when you see that, that therapy is working and he's moving to getting back to himself.
And you definitely have the care, the concern for yourself, for others. We might have a quick time for a real quick one here as we're about to close out. This is from Fawn on YouTube. "Hello, doctor. My sister-in-law is still recovering from a past relationship with a narcissist, but she said she's ready to date again. She said she's ready to start slowly. And my question is, what are the healthiest ways to set boundaries in a new relationship?" Do you have a quick response to this one?
I'm going to try. So, internal boundaries. Remember, when we talk about boundaries, this is not externally. You're not telling people that you don't want something done. You have to develop boundaries from within that you're not going to let something, if someone's gaslighting you, you're not going to question yourself. You're not going to invalidate yourself. You're not going to minimize yourself. So you really do have to set those internal boundaries. You have to know the people who you're dealing with and understand how much of that you're going to be able to take, you want to take in and make yours. So yes, that's the quick short answer to
I
that.
know it's such a big topic, and we covered so much ground today, and we didn't even get to all the questions because there's so many people out there that are dealing with this, that have dealt with it, or know somebody in their family or relationship. So thank you so much for your wisdom and your time and your expertise. But that's all the time we do have for today. So thank you, Dr. Rachna Buksani Mirpuri, for your wonderful insight. I'm Julie Donaldson, and we will see you once again next time on Ask the Doc.
Send in your questions to questions@allhealthtv.com or AllHealthGo on Facebook or YouTube, or visit the Ask the Doc page on our website, allhealthtv.com.
Funding for this program was brought to you by Michael J. Zinner, MD,